So I'm going to talk about data visualization and all its genericness. It's a tough topic to present on because it's pretty generic. Lots of people have different experiences with it and different expectations. And so I may go over stuff that you might get bored with, and I may go over stuff that goes over your head a little bit. So let me know if for some reason you need something else. I'm going to do examples and stuff like that. Feel free to stop me with questions. Huh. All right, hold on one second. Technical difficulty. Nope, that's my notes. No, you're not supposed to see that. All right, we're all good. So, I'm the interactive news developer at MinnPost, which is an online newspaper here for Minnesota. I'm not a data visualization expert. I am a programmer. I build things. I'm an engineer. But I have a fair amount of practical experience actually making data visualizations because we use them in news articles to kind of make the news a little more exciting. The web has allowed us to experiment more than print would previously allow us. So most of my experiences are on the web, and that means that's sort of my medium. But with data visualization, it doesn't have to be web-based. It doesn't even have to be computer-based. You can do physical data visualizations. There's lots of ways to think about this. But most of my examples will probably be web-based, just because that's what I'm used to. Sorry. I also work in a team. So the stuff we do is pretty awesome, but I can't take full credit for it. We have Katie Hink and Tom Nahill, who both help me out in making the cool stuff that we do. And if for some reason there's not enough screens for you, you can follow along at this URL and maybe skip ahead if you wanted to. I also run the data visualization group for the Twin Cities. We meet every third Tuesday. Anyone is welcome, any level. I would dare say that not a single person that comes is an expert in data visualization. It's mostly people learning from people. Most of our monthly meetups are presentations, but we just had our first hack day, which was a day where people kind of just came together and worked on projects together and learned from each other, actually at the U over at the Humphrey Institute. And that was a lot of fun. So what is data visualization? In my opinion, is just as generic as it sounds. It is taking data, information, and putting it in a visual way that communicates what you want better. So it can be charts, graphs, interactives, infographics, just whatever various design sort of techniques you use to communicate better information. The other day, I was talking to someone, and they were like, yeah, we got some graphs, we got some charts, but we don't have any data visualization. And I was confused by that statement. But it also, the way we perceive, or what our notion of data visualization is obviously pretty different from person to person. All these icons and the icons you'll see throughout are from the Noun project, which is an amazing group of icons, sets of icons. You can use, some of them are public domain, some of them require attribution, but they're all pretty awesome, and there's thousands of them now. So, and to me, this is data visualization. This is visualizing visualizations. Taking an idea, a graph, and creating a more visual, succinct way of showing it. So if we think of data visualization as sort of functional art as opposed to fine art, it means that it serves a practical purpose while still being, pleasurable to the eye and fun to interact with. Architecture or furniture is what some people might consider functional art. So we're going to compare this to a chair. A chair, prime purpose is to sit on. If it is not fulfilling that purpose, it's probably fine art or garbage. A folding chair is actually a pretty cool design. when you think about it, they're usually not that comfortable though. So, we want comfort with our chair, and we want it to be easy to use. It's got to be inviting. And sometimes we have very specific uses of those items, those chairs. And even with specific uses, it's got to be easy to use. Like this example only has a couple levers that are obvious to interact with. It's also got to be pleasing to the eye. It's got to actually be something that you want to interact with and be a part of. And so, to me, that encompasses data visualization as well. It's kind of that match of form and function really well without sacrificing either one. That's what successful data visualization is about. So why are we even talking about this? Why is it such a hot topic right now? Data visualization has been going on for a long, long time. This is not anything new. But there's a reason why there's actually a lot of people in this room. And it's not because of me. And it's got a lot to do with computers. Computers have become pretty prevalent. They're actually really good at visualizing things and crunching a lot of data. The internet, with everyone's ability to get on it, or most everyone's ability to get on it, increased bandwidth, has allowed us to see more visualizations and have it more in our regular eye. And to me, I'm a firm believer that open source has actually contributed to a lot of this as well, because a lot of the tools that I use and a lot of the tools that my colleagues use are either software that other people have created and allowed other people to use for free, or they've created themselves and shared with others. And so it's really allowed people to do a lot of things inexpensively and collaboratively. Does anyone not know what open source is? It's totally okay if you don't. Cool. So we're going to go through an overly simple example. And I'm sorry if it's boring. So we have our data, right? 42, which I was a big fan of the number well before Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Here it is visualized in all its simplicity, kind of specific attributes about it in our Roman characters. Or is that Roman numeral? No? I don't know. Yeah, right. Good call, thanks. Full of smart people. So we add a little bit of context. We're talking about a percentage, 42% of something. And that idea of context and putting information around essentially what our data is really important. Because we need to think about our audience and where they're coming from and what they know when they see your visualization and what they need to know to get to where you want them to be. So let's add a little color. Color is actually really powerful. Outside of it just giving some aesthetics to it, it creates a mood and tone. We associate colors with specific things. It also can convey information implicitly and explicitly, creating different amounts with different colors, that sort of thing. But that blue is a little dark for our purposes, so change it a little bit. This is really bright in this room, actually. So let's make it bigger, because obviously we need to see it. And we're in a room where we're not really close to the screen. Try a different font. This is a serif font. It is not really a good choice, mostly because often we use serif fonts. Serif means it has like little things on the end of it overall. I'm not a designer. I'm not talking about this in any technical way. But we usually associate those fonts with big blocks of text. And makes it easier to read, and there may be some actual research around why that is, but I don't know that. But a sans serif font, fonts that are without serifs, are usually good for numbers, and so it's more appropriate for these. And then if we add a little opacity to the number, it sort of blends into the background. It also, opacity, not in this case, is not really conveying anything, but it's actually a really powerful tool to convey certain things, usually the magnitude of something. Right, and so we add a little more context. And so, again, labels, context, annotations, pointing out specific points on graphs. These are all really important tools to help your audience get to where you want them to be when they look at your visualization. And then thinking about our audience again, the background is really annoying. And we're on a projector in a projected space. So there's just a lot of things to consider when showing just a simple number, a simple idea. So going into more sets of examples, ones that have a little more data. I'm kind of a huge fan of maps, and I actually collect maps. We call our basement the map room because we hang up all our maps down there. And most people actually don't think of maps as visualization, or they think of maps as a tool to put a visualization on top of. But that's actually why maps are such a successful data visualization, because it gets out of your way, allows you to do the thing you want, which is find information quickly, and you don't actually think about, well, this is tons of data that go into a map, especially if you think about a street map. Thousands, millions of vector geographical data is involved in making those things. And I couldn't even imagine making street maps like back before computers. So I'm going to go through some maps, and these are going to be what you might consider basic maps, but they're all infused with different decisions. Cartographers are kind of the map data visualization people. They get a special name. What am I going to do? I don't know why this is so light. It's not supposed to be this light. But anyway, it is supposed to be light. It's supposed to be muted. Obviously, the Twin Cities. Overall, it's pretty muted. Nothing really sticks out. This is really good if you wanted to overlay other things on top of it. And in fact, you might want to take out more if you wanted to overlay other stuff. But as soon as you zoom in, the labels on the streets really pop out, which is not necessarily a good thing, depending on what you want to do. And so forth. Things like that change, but mostly the labels. And so we take on another example, and you'll see that these actually look a lot similar. They're actually from the same data source, OpenStreetMap, which is a really amazing open wiki of map data. It's essentially the Wikipedia of maps. And it actually drives a lot of the maps you'll see that are not Google Maps. So this one's sort of a night theme. You can see the roads a lot more clearly, especially the highways. The roads and the water are sort of the same color, so it's a little hard to see some of that stuff. And as we zoom in, some of the park areas really like pop up, and who knows if that's your intention, but that's what is happening, you know. This one is from the Map of the Dead, which is a sort of website that's focused around a possible zombie apocalypse and how you would find things you needed during that time of strife. So obviously the colors in themselves just give you this tone of, you know, what you're supposed to be feeling, which is huge. The roads, again, are still kind of the focus, but as we zoom in, you'll see the roads are actually very much the focus. And I don't know, the game is sort of supposed to make you find, like, if you needed a gun, where would you actually go to, like, so it's pretty interesting. It's fun. This is an example from Mapbox. They're a mapping service and allows you to create map tiles. These are map tiles very easily. We use them a lot at MinnPost and stuff like that. So we start to see, you can't see too well because Minnesota is pretty flat, but there's actually hill shading in this, and there's actual elevation information here, and you're starting to see land use information, and you can't really see the roads. I mean, especially on the big screen here. So the actual focus of this is much different. And then the water sort of really pops out once you start getting in here. This is an example from GitHub, which is a code hosting service. And they recently allowed you, if you uploaded a specific type of GIS data file, they'll actually create a map for you. And so this is their map that they use as their base layer, and then put your geographical data on top of it. And so you'll see it's pretty muted. It's meant to have things overlaid on it. And the labels are pretty distinct again. What's interesting, I don't know if it'll show up too well on the screen, but as you start to get closer, you won't see it on this, but I think some of the other screens you'll see it. But the building footprints really start to come out, which is an interesting choice. I don't know why you would need those, but the next few examples are from Stamen, which is a really amazing design studio out in San Francisco. They do amazing interactive data visualization work, and they've created a group of map tiles that are free to use. This one's called Toner, and the focus of it is to be printed, essentially. And so hence why you have a lot of things taken out, you have a lot of contrast, and so it's very minimal. You'll see that the labels are actually to the sides of the road, not within the road, so it helps with printing again. And it's also, they have sort of a less contrasty version that's really good for overlays, since it's essentially very minimal information. So this is terrain. This is also by Stamen. Again, this is completely different. They start to bring in elevation data as well. You can start to see the urban areas, essentially, from the land use. And then this almost looks more traditional, like a regular street atlas that you might like physically buy. And so it's very street focused. You have full like icons for interstates and stuff like that. And then again, it's very road focused. And this one is Watercolor, hence the name. And this is again the same data source, but rendered completely differently. And actually, this really is not functional in the sense of it's not really going to get you somewhere necessarily. And so it's more of an art piece than it is really. It is data visualization because this is data, right? But it's not really serving a purpose or telling someone necessarily about things. And it's still kind of road focused. Like this doesn't have to show the roads, but it still is. It's really amazing. I don't even know how they make it all happen, but it's pretty cool. This is one from the National Park Service. And as you can see, there's no roads. You can barely see the state names. Obviously, they bring out the park areas very much so and label them accordingly. And some of the water features, as well as the elevation and stuff you'd care about if you wanted to explore parks. And this is one created by Greenpeace for some ocean advocacy stuff that I don't actually know that much about. But the key thing to look at is that the land is completely out of the picture, essentially. It is there, I mean, in the big picture. It obviously is in your view, but it's not where your eyes focus. They've specifically highlighted areas where they want to focus on advocacy, and there's texture elevation to the oceans to help give them some depth. And then satellite imagery, which some may argue is not data visualization, but I think it is because the raw imagery is actually processed through many different filters and other techniques to get what you see. And colors are, enriched or put back. Clouds are sort of removed. And so there is a lot of data and processing involved in this sort of stuff, and satellite imagery of the Twin Cities is not really that exciting, but it's pretty exciting stuff. And a lot of these colors are actually brought out a little bit and not necessarily what you would see from space. So, going to another example, not as much data, but a little more interesting or different. So at our data visualization hack day on Saturday, I got a set of data from the Minneapolis Police Department that was all the robberies that has happened to date for this year. So some January 1st to last Friday. And the person that gave it to me wanted to just see what we would come up with in we essentially spent a few hours just sort of hacking on it and figuring out what was in there. So about 3 or 4 of us worked on it. And so I'm just going to show you some of the stuff we came up with, which aren't really finished things, but different ways to visualize it. So this is essentially the data. There's about 1,200 rows of this. We have time and place, and categories, a date, and a case number, which no one really found useful. Though if you wanted to look up details of that specific thing, it would be. So it's really hard to see the labels on this one, but what we're showing here is essentially every day and the amount of robberies that happened. So you'll start to see a sort of trend as it kind of goes up through the year. And this is just with Excel. I'm not a lover of Excel, but it is really actually helpful in doing really quick analysis, really quick visualizations to see trends and figure out what are the actual interesting things about your data. And even getting, for me, even getting this chart together, it took a long time. I don't know how to use Excel, but I encourage you to. So you see some trends with this. If we sort of group things by the day of the week, and the top one is Sunday, you'll see that Saturday and Sunday are obviously the highest, and Wednesday you see a little dip. So these are good points to then maybe explore into making a sort of larger visualization if that's your goal. And then this is grouped by the hour, starting from midnight to midnight. And you'll see obviously the low is really low at 7 a.m., 7, 8, and then the highs from like 11 to 2, which is nothing too mind-blowing, but then you can start to see magnitude here, or see the amount of change. And obviously the police department makes decisions on this. They try to put police officers out specific times of day, specific places. Excel does have different ways to make things, display them differently. This is just using basic Excel, different colors and layouts. This just brings out the line a little more. And then what I spent my time on was working on Heatmap, which so this is not by any means a finished visualization. There's many things wrong with this, but it's a good way to start to see sorts of things and trends. So this is all of it. This is very high level. Just kind of what you see is like robbery everywhere, which is not really helpful for the actual case, right? So as you zoom in, it starts to break apart a little bit, and you can start to see specific places where multiple robberies happen. You also don't get a sense of actual value. You get a sense of magnitude here, but there's no way to like hover over and say, this means 5 robberies as opposed to 300 robberies. But we can sort of confirm our other analysis by looking at some filters here, and as the day progresses, more and more robberies happen. And there's obviously highs on the weekends, that sort of thing. And if you go through the bunch, you notice that there actually there's obviously places that have higher rates, but it's not necessarily the same all the time, you know. So again, using data visualization to find out pieces of information. Yeah.
What did you use to make this map?
So this is with Leaflet, which is a mapping JavaScript library, and then another JavaScript library called Heatmap.js. And it looked cool, but it was kind of a pain to get to work. Yeah. And then some other person made this with Tableau, which is a visualization tool. It's kind of a desktop visualization tool. They're coming out with a Mac version, but I don't know when exactly. And there's a free, there's a Tableau public. It's free. If you want to pay for it, it's pretty expensive. But it's like Excel charting on steroids. Like, it's pretty slick. I don't actually use it because I don't have the money for it, or I use a Mac, but it's pretty helpful. It's a little small on the screen, I'm sorry about that. So essentially what we're seeing is all the incidents, and then different colors are different categories. So there's business, person, and then aggregated for the robberies. And you can sort of filter through this. And then down at the bottom, it shows the statistical outliers. So you'll see that these red points are sort of high days and stuff that you might want to look at. And then we could, you know, get it down to just certain kinds. And Tableau is really nice because it's a graphical interface to make this and then export it to the web pretty easily. So you don't need to know how to code at all to do this. But like Excel, it still takes a fair amount of skills to actually use effectively. It's not like anyone can do it. Anyone can do it eventually, but so just a different way of exploring it and finding specific bits of information that may be important and that you might want to turn into another data visualization presentation. So what we did, this is separate from this data, but at MinnPost we recently, I guess a few months ago, put together a crime dashboard for Minneapolis. And the thing about data visualizations is that I probably spend more time working with data, processing data, putting it in different formats, aggregating it, than I spend any, you know, remotely close to actually just visualizing it. There's little chance that you'll have data that just in the right way that you want it to be able to visualize in a specific format. And often you don't necessarily have the data you need, right? As academics, I assume most of you are, in the research world, you kind of actually, if you have an idea that you want to visualize or a deal you want to explore, you have sort of the means to go get that data or produce that data, more so than I do. And so often I am very driven by the data sets we have and how to explore them and visualize them in a way that makes sense and that's not too biased by the data set itself. So essentially what the Minneapolis Police Department had was the number of incidents by month, by category, FBI crime category, which is about 10 different categories, and then by neighborhood, and then went back about 10 years. And so that was basically our starting point. At that point, we also did some requesting of data from the police department to get more incident level data, because that would have explored a lot more possibilities as far as what we could have done with it. But by the time we actually figured out that it's a tough conversation to have with them, and they wanted some money for it, and by that time we'd already halfway built the thing we were going to build, so it didn't make sense. But we do fully understand that what we built is limited based on the data set that we Um, yeah. So this is our dashboard. I'll actually go into the real thing. I'll explain it, and then we can talk about the choices that we made. It's not exceptionally visual per se, but it's a lot of information, right? So I'll show you the interface and then tell you about the decisions we made along the way. So we're getting Minneapolis. This is for last month. That's the newest month of data we have. Showing the total number of incidents, the amount of change from last month, the amount of change from the same month last year, this rate per 1,000 residents, which is essentially a fairly standard crime crime metric. Because if we didn't adjust for population, we would just see high population areas when we visualize things. And then the population, just to get an idea of that magnitude. From there, we break it down per category and show the change per month. We can see which neighborhoods are higher or lower amounts of crime, and then we can see a sort of longer-term history of crime. And then we can interact with it. We can funnel it down to one type of crime, and see the same information, but specifically filtered by that. We've combined a few of the crimes to create these different groups. And then we can jump into any of the neighborhoods and essentially see the same thing. And then the graph, the only thing really different is that we actually show Minneapolis here, so you can get a sense of where this neighborhood is relative to the whole city. So, sort of what went into this. So one, the data is really limited. We can't go into time of day because we don't have that information. We can't go into any more specific types of crimes. We can't go into more crimes. This is a limited set of crimes. It's not everything mashed into 10 categories. It's just the 10 categories. We actually we wrote a blog post when we first released this that explained a lot of this, because if we had a footnote, we would have had like half the page with a footnote of this. So from there, we really want to show sort of what was happening in the city right now, right? So one, we can't show right now, we can show the month. So that's the decision of showing the month. We really want to show sort of, so essentially the goal is to show safety, right? It's not necessarily crime. We want to show safety via crime. The idea that people care about their safety, and crime is a very important piece of that. And so there's actually a lot of different data sets we could bring in here to show more about safety, but we have limited resources. So thinking about safety means thinking about like sort of the trend of crime and thinking about, is this actually different? And so that's why we have the change from last month. And crime actually fluctuates a lot during the year, but it's still pretty normalized throughout the year. You know, higher crime in the summer. So we want to show the same from last year as opposed to, 2 months ago. And then again, as I explained before, this crime per 1,000 is really important to be able to see outside of just population density. And then, so since we have a sort of a predictable occurrence of higher crime in certain months, we wanted to somewhat normalize by that. And so that's why we did this specific graph of 12-month periods starting from this month to create sort of somewhat normalized look at it. That said, each month the graph will change. The points are not actually the same But we're not allowing people to go look at those things, so it doesn't matter too much. And so you can start to see actual long-term history of trend of the crime. And then with the map, we wanted to show people care about sort of how is their neighborhood compared to the neighborhood next to them, or in the city overall. And so that's why we showed this map. And given that we don't really know the amounts of crimes that are happening in each neighborhood, the coloring is automatically created, and so it has its pluses and minuses around what it kind of highlights. And those sort of stops they're not arbitrary, but they're not. I don't think they're linear. So an interesting point along that, another sort of deficiency of the data set is that crime doesn't necessarily happen like in neighborhoods, or like specifically in neighborhoods, in the sense that crime usually happens, aggregate crime usually happens on smaller scales, like an intersection or a couple intersections. And so neighborhoods in Minneapolis are fairly small and not a bad level of geographic specificity, but it isn't really showing the places where crimes are happening necessarily. It's just showing an idea of it. So,
Alan, can you talk a little bit about how you created that? I see that information along the bottom.
Sure.
Mapbox and GitHub and K-means clustering. So are you the one that went into all those tools and
yes,
worked with them?
yes. So how we created this, again, so I'm a programmer. Those are my skill sets. And then also we have no money. And so I'm used to using open source stuff and tinkering with that. So this is not the only way to do it. But a lot of this is sort of just using a bunch of different software libraries, coding it together. The visualization aspects of this, or the more visual ones, Leaflet, again, is used for the mapping. And then the charts is a library called HighCharts. The rest of it is sort of JavaScript architecture tools to kind of put it all together.
So the left side is high charts.
The chart at the bottom.
The chart at the bottom.
Yeah. The rest of it, I mean, this is just, styled numbers.
Okay.
Nothing in particular. Sorry. Yeah, so this is what we came up with. We are hoping to do St. Paul at some point, but their data is completely different. And we're working with the police department to try to get more data. Yes.
I don't want to interrupt,
No,
but
please.
I have some questions. This is really interesting. But I'm curious about a couple things. One, why Minneapolis? Why did you choose and why crime? I mean, I sort of have my ideas about why, but I'd like to hear
Sure.
why.
Yeah.
And I also know a little bit of background that there was a big kerfuffle with the police department because they didn't like
Yes.
their data being visualized because it actually had a big
Well,
impact, or they didn't want to let the data go really, and I think that's a really important civic aspect of what
Sure.
you're doing. So if you could just kind of frame it a little bit
Sure,
more,
sure.
I'd be interested to hear that.
What was the first one? I'm sorry.
Why crime and why Minneapolis?
Right, okay.
Why did you choose
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
You're talking about limited resources.
Yeah,
blah,
yeah,
blah, blah. Like, what was the
Sure.
thinking of?
So why we chose Minneapolis? St. Paul has some data that's on their website. It's actually, they do have a little bit. We could obviously do other cities besides St. Paul and Minneapolis. But it's kind of more exciting, and we're a news organization, and though we try to make good ethical decisions, we still want to make things that people will read. So the St. Paul data was in a really odd format, though it was granular. So it was each incident, and it had obfuscated addresses. So instead of like 300, street, it was 3XX street, or 301, or instead of like 356, it was 3XX, right? So it's sort of aggregated by block level, which is fine. But also didn't have any latitude and longitude with it, so it meant that we would have to spend a fair amount of resources geocoding all that data, which is not a simple process. And so yeah, I mean, the data was really what drove our decisions. Though the limited set that we got from the Minneapolis actually turned out to be a kind of good aggregate top level amount of data to visualize. And why we focused on crime is because there's a couple things. One, there's not really any sort of crime overviews in the Twin Cities. Pioneer Press recently did a St. Paul map, and there's spot crime. I don't actually know how they get their data. It's weird. But both those things I don't think were really that great. Not bad, but I personally, I don't like sort of point crime maps where you see a map, like essentially what you're seeing is a map with each individual crime on it, because it's not, one, points on a map is not all that helpful. It's hard to really see trends, analysis, the amount of any specific thing. It allows you to sort of drill down and find out where specific things happened, right? And to me, there's kind of two different sides of crime. Is the individual, say if you get mugged or your neighbor's house gets broken into, it's a very important event. You get very emotionally charged by it. And those are really important, and those require sort of personal interactions, right? But there's the idea of safety and sort of long-term crime of, well, my neighbor's house got broken into, but that's not actually anything significantly different from the usual way of things. That doesn't mean it's not important. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying these are different ways of looking at it. And so that was kind of our focus a lot, was to create a more aggregate view of how crime is happening. And if there's really significantly differences. Like this month, or last month, we got that robbery data because robberies are up a little bit. And robberies are kind of their, one of their big indicators, because it's a random on random person, often random person act of violence. And so it's a pretty big indicator crime. And so hopefully we can find some of that with this visualization, even though by month it aggregates a little too much to see some of it. And then with the data in the Minneapolis Police Department, essentially they didn't do anything wrong. The events that happened were that we released this, and then a week later, they took down the data from the website. And how the internet goes, I tweeted out, I was like, hey, this happened, is this a coincidence? You know, and then all the journalism people were like, no, what a bunch of jerks. People were writing stories. And we obviously like called them and was like, hey, what happened? And the person was like, we don't know. We're gonna go find out. And all this is in the matter of like 2 days. And then, so people are like, oh my God. And then we come to find out that they just took it down, the web people took it down because of some weird technical issue, which is pretty weird and a whole nother story in itself. But, and it had nothing to do with the fact that we had released this. At least this is what we're told. Obviously, you know, you can be a little skeptical if you want to. And so, you know, a couple days later they put it back up. But since then, what's interesting in the long term is that the data practices people, the sort of official channels you go to get the crime data, not bad people, but a little keeping the data close to their chest. It's been hard to get data from them. But since we've released this, we've actually had one of the analyst people come to us and say, you know, like, how do we get this? Like, how do we make this better for ourselves and for you guys? And that's how we got the robbery data, which isn't really actually a little out of the chain of command. So yeah, it was really interesting, data-wise, not necessarily data visualization-wise. Yeah, of course. That's all I got. Any more questions?
You mentioned something about your visualization being too biased by your data set. Do you consider that last example an example of that? Maybe you can talk about that idea more, or how you kind of grapple with that, with the data sets you get?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of things that need to be taken into account when doing data analysis, and then taking your analysis and visualizing it. Because especially with visualization, you're taking things out to focus on other things, and so there's a lot of decisions that may actually affect the context, affect some of the numbers, and it's really important to know about those, and if you want to communicate those to your audience in some other way. Using data sources that you don't collect or that you don't create yourself, there's always tons of questions. Crime data, there's lots of crimes that aren't reported. There's lots of possibilities that the police officers don't report the crime, or don't report it accurately. There's no really guarantee that it's accurate. It's still probably the best source of that data, without collecting it yourself and using a lot of resources. There's a fair amount of data that's not public. Different types of crime are not really public. There's lots of personally identifiable information that doesn't get released or can't get released. And then, especially with the idea of safety and taking crime sort of that level that people really want to look at, bringing in other data sets and thinking about those. These are crimes that are reported. These aren't crimes that go to court. They aren't people that get convicted. We don't really know what happens to these incidents. We don't know if that even actually happened. A report doesn't mean that something happened. There's no proof that it happened. It's just that someone has a pretty strong idea that it probably did. And so, yeah, so the idea that the data is just never really going to be too perfect. And then in our case, the aggregate data really created many limitations for us. Is that?
Yeah.
Yes?
Would you consider that then the storytelling aspect, sort of the POV, or that sort of what you decide to include? And not obviously, Minneapolis is broken up into several neighborhoods, and there's been a lot of talk around this. There's been some jokey, satirical kinds of graphics up there. I mean, obviously, there's a great sensitivity to how these things are displayed.
Right, yeah, totally.
And do you work also with the reporters to provide context, make sure?
For this, I mean, it's kind of, when we started, we were talking with some of our reporters and trying to figure out some of the big spikes in crime, but essentially even over 10 years, there wasn't too many really significant spikes, and some of them could be accounted for, some of them couldn't. Crime changes are pretty long term. Even in 10 years, you don't, and I think in any city, you wouldn't see huge differences. Maybe from week to week, but not necessarily even from month to month, adjusting for time of year and all that. And so, yeah, I mean, one thing is to not, so we have that map and there's neighborhoods, and there's obviously like neighborhoods that have more crime than others. And we are essentially pointing those out, right? But we are intentionally not pointing them out so much. It's not like when you first come to the site, it says, oh, check out this neighborhood, it's got the most crime. You know, it's allowing people to figure that out and explore it themselves. not using, using just that flat color scale of just red, as opposed to possibly different color sets that might really bring out the highest neighborhood, those sorts of things. And again, even the idea that, say crime is up 20%, that may seem high, but there's a lot of context around that. Like that's why, you see those top numbers are not, there's not one big one, right? We intentionally wanted to have all those metrics. The population is not actually that important, but sort of even, because we don't really know what a good indicator of crime is. Like there's no one metric to have that, and so it's really important to make things a little more subtler in this, for this specific context. Yes.
You're obviously adding the new data each month as it comes in, and I'm wondering how much of that is automated and how much of that is kind of, taking and manipulating data each month. You're talking more about sustainability, so I'm wondering what
Yes.
conversations you all have had about keeping something like this going.
Because I'm a programmer, it's easier for me to automate things than most people. For this specific case, it is slightly manual. The flip side of Excel is that it is not a data format, and is an application format. And so they release their data in Excel, and unfortunately, they make different formatting decisions each month, or space things out, or actually if there's no data or there's no, I assume no incidents for a reported for a neighborhood, they just don't have a line item for that, right? So we assume that no incidents have happened, it's not bad data, but who knows, so we have to look at it and then say, all right, get that file, and then do everything, so it's just slightly better.
How do you visualize anomalies? Like if you had no data but you knew there were points that were just missing, how would you put them?
That's an interesting question. It's depend on how you're visualizing things. There was, I can't remember. Anyway, New York Times did a graph of wineries, and it's very exponential over the past 5 years or something like that. But they were missing a year out of that data. And so the line went up, and then for that sort of specific year, they had dashes that sort of projected that it would go from this to this. And so, yeah, just sort of a visual indication is usually the best. Mostly a missing data points creates a lot of trouble for data processing and doing visualizations outside of deciding how to visualize it.
It's in the wrong place.
Right.
If you're forgetting data in columns, somebody types in the wrong columns.
Yeah. No, and then they're manually putting these things in Excel, and there's got to be human error in there. And that's another thing we wanted to we really especially with this sort of piece, we don't want to be this is crime, we want to be this is crime, because we don't, there's just so many factors that human error is one of them for sure.
And yet you use red.
What's that?
You use red.
Yeah. Choosing colors is hard.
Can you say something else about data versus application formats? You mentioned that.
Sure. So with Excel, an Excel file it's the data, but it's also wrapped in around all this formatting and other things that tell the Excel application what to do with that data, as opposed to a data set, which is essentially just numbers. So CSV is a very flat text file, easily readable by computers format. Excel creates a lot of problems. PDF is not even close to a data format, even though many government agencies just don't know any better. I don't think they're making those decisions poorly necessarily. sometimes with a PDF, you get data actually embedded in the PDF, and it's actually easier to get some of that data out, but essentially PDF is like an image format. It's a way of doing those sorts of things. Does that help?
I'm curious about, beyond your work at MinnPost, you're part of the Civic Hacker Group?
Sure.
Is that right?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I'm really fascinated by the work that you
Sure. So I'm part of a group called Open Twin Cities, and the goal of Open Twin Cities is to create a community of technology people, designers, engineers, as well as civil servants, public officials, and then community leaders, people that are actually trying to solve problems in the cities, getting together to create technologies, both big T and little t, that will help our communities. So it's sort of this just ad hoc group of people that want to do good and want to use technology. It's based around, sort of based from an organization called Code for America, which is out in San Francisco, that runs, overall their goal is to help governments use technology better, sort of bridge that divide between Silicon Valley and government. And so there's actually many different civic hacking groups, civic hacking or civic technology around the country. Ours is sort of new. Minnesota historically has pretty amazing data laws around public data, but not really a lot of good laws around open data or transparency or the use of open source or other stuff. So we're still getting going. Anyone is welcome. All right, that's perfectly on an hour, so I think I'll. Do you have a question? Or you just.
Yeah.
Yeah, do it.
So, I know most of the people in this room, and some of the visualization projects they have going on. I wonder if you could, what motivates your choice of a specific tool? You talked about a number of them. So if you were doing X kind of map or working with X kind of data, I would want to look for this type of tool. That's very vague, broad. I know it is,
Yeah.
but if it's too broad, please tell me.
Sure. So again, my experience, my skill set is programming specifically on the web. So that's my experience. But so with that context, almost everything we do is in JavaScript, which is sort of a programming language that runs in your web browser. The web, HTML, is a really good medium. It's essentially ubiquitous across computers and the internet, so you don't have to worry about, well, you do have to worry about cross-platform stuff. But, so it's a really good tool, actually, to put your visualizations in. So we use a lot of JavaScript. That's our sort of programming environment. And from there, so D3.js is what I would personally say is the only data visualization programming library. And it really gives you the tools to do visualizations. It's also really complex and hard to use, and I don't even know how to use it well. But the guy that writes D3 works for New York Times, and they do amazing stuff. But it's about like giving you the real small pieces you need for data visualizations. So Leaflet, again, is what we use for mapping often, and Mapbox is a service to sort of make tile sets, which you then usually put visualizations on top of. HighCharts is we use fairly often. It's a charting library. I don't consider that really a data visualization library. And there's actually many different charting libraries. especially in JavaScript, and so whatever you feel comfortable with. The thing about data visualizations, at least for us, is that they're very unique. Like, you can have a sort of type of data, and you can have a tool to visualize that, but that's not necessarily gonna communicate exactly what you want in the end. And so everything we build is essentially from scratch. And we may use sort of techniques here and there to pull things together, but it's hard to just use one tool. Again, I don't use Tableau, but I've seen it, and it's a pretty amazing tool. No programming experience needed. It's sort of drag fields, sum them, aggregate them, and then create charts and maps and graphs and stuff like that. It's a pretty powerful tool. Like I said, Excel can get you pretty far. Not too bad. There's things like Timeline.js. There's like Map Story. There's sort of hosted services.
Story maps.
Yeah.
ArcGIS probably.
That allow you to put your data into their system and sort of create a visualization from it. And they're not bad, but again, it's not, for our needs, it's not good enough, but it could be for yours.
But for someone who doesn't have any programming experience, I suppose you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
really, like if you're a humanist and you really.
Yeah.
Um,
No,
do you have a favorite go-to all-around program? I suppose you don't.
I really don't, and
Yeah,
maybe that's why. So things like Timeline.js, Map Story. What is that? There's some infographic ones. There's Data Wrapper. Which is a charting. So you put in your data, it gives you visualizations, sort of allows you to put things around. It's essentially, I mean, it's a better looking Excel, and you can easily put it on the web much easier than you can with Excel. But if you don't need to, then, also Excel costs money, so it's not always the best option.
I wonder if people have certain projects they're working on, or just ideas. Like, I've got a bunch of this type of data, and I've thought about doing something with it, and just kind of getting Alan's professional opinion about it. People want to, they're open their project brain. And
Yeah.
ask some stuff. Anybody?
I have been working on a project about social stereotypes, and basically I created a survey in which I collected, different perceptions about different groups of people. So I have this huge amount of attributes and stereotypes, and I'm still struggling with that. How can I visualize this, and what is the best tool? I've been playing with parsing a bit, and playing with text and how that would look, but I haven't found a way to visually, produce a piece that is meaningful and that integrates just text, because I'm working with text, not working with numbers. Of course, I can get numbers from there and kind of get statistics, but that's not the point. Do you know about any tool you might recommend? For
Text is a little tough because it is very specific to your data. Yeah, I mean, one thing to keep in mind is that you really want to have that goal, that sort of, that thing that you want to communicate picked out, and then visualize from there, as opposed to visualizing something in general. So in that vein, it's picking out the specific sort of attributes, or what is actually interesting in the data.
Well, the whole idea is to the user or the person who approaches this piece would kind of get a sense or a perception of what's going on. It's not really about saying this is what, you know, a certain number of people think about this or that. It's more about, you know, kind of showing the state of things and in a different way. Because I mean, I could do that with an infographic, but,
Sure.
but I mean, I think that's not what I want to do. And I'm still kind of looking for different tools, and I've checked a couple of the tools you just mentioned, but I think that perhaps in that sense there is still a gap to be filled, you know, like some kind of program that, as it was mentioned, for someone who's not from a computer science background, so like social driven, art driven, still we're interested in interactive, you know, visualizations and how that can create an impact in society itself. But definitely, I think we are still kind of.
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, there's still many tools that need to be created to help non-technical people. But again, I don't know how to do that personally, just because I feel like really effective visualizations are fairly unique and hard to really generalize. That doesn't mean it's not helpful to generically visualize things, but I mean, for like an exploration sort of piece that it sounds like you're talking about, you still want to have maybe not a linear way that users would go through it, but what they should explore it, right? But they still should get something out of it, right? You know, like maybe showing the state. So like, what is the state? Like thinking about that and sort of what are those specific things that you can think about visually, and then trying to go from there a little bit.
Yeah, perhaps, I don't know, sometimes I think, am I trying to do something that's not something else? I don't know, looking at different visualizations you've made, I kind of get a sense of, it could be done, it could be achieved, I just kind of have to, you know, that. But yeah, I was just like wondering if you know of any specific tool that might enable.
I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, the text is a little harder to do for sure.
I saw you pull up raw, Alan. It's been making a lot of waves.
Yeah, I don't know too. I've used it a little bit, but raw is this thing by densitydesign.org, and it's paste in your data, and then you can create different types of charts with it. It allows you to like drag things over. I can't see it all that well, so I probably won't make this work, but and it's essentially an interface for D3 chart stuff. So it allows you to do a lot of things and then pick some colors. And then you can export it out as an SVG or PNG, or HTML as well. So it's a pretty exciting tool. It's new. Many Eyes has been around for a while. It is from IBM. Again, sort of you upload data and then pick a whole bunch of stuff, different formats and visualizations. A lot of these tools you have to think about putting data into a very specific way first. Otherwise, you're not gonna get too far.
And that's a theme for a lot of digital projects. Most of the work is on the back end.
Yeah. Yes.
Whether it's mapping, whether it's something like a Mecca exhibit, or text mining, data mining, a lot of it is not the final product that comes at the very end.
Visually is another sort of hosted service that is focused around infographics, which is usually a static set of visualizations that have a theme. I've never actually used it, but I think it's free to sign up and upload your data and create stuff with. I think there's a couple other sort of infographic sites like this. else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.